"You're an embarrassment," Declan said, and he didn't lower his voice. "Not even a little. I want you out of this building before the end of the week." The lobby of Meridian Financial was all glass and cold light, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. It was working. Saoirse didn't move. She held the cardboard box against her chest. Her stapler, her spare charger, a small cactus her sister had given her when she got the job 3 years ago. And she looked at the man she had loved for 4 of the last 5 years. And she waited for him to say something that would make this make sense. He didn't. He turned back to his phone. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Blythe, stood so and still flinched whenever Declan raised his voice, kept her eyes on her screen. The security guard near the door looked at the ceiling. Saoirse walked past both of them and pushed through the revolving door into the February air, and the cold hit her face like a hand. Toronto in February doesn't apologize for itself. She stood on Bay Street with her box and her cactus, and the sound of traffic, and she thought, so that's how it ends. 3 days ago, she had been sitting in this same lobby waiting for Declan to come down from a meeting, and he had walked out of the elevator and seen her and smiled. That slow, deliberate smile he used when he wanted something. And she had thought, stupidly, finally, that things were turning around, that the distance of the last few months had been work stress, his father's health, the deal that kept falling through. All the reasonable explanations she had assembled for herself in the dark at 2 in the morning. She had not thought, he is about to fire me in front of 40 people and walk away without blinking. She found a bench across the street, sat down. The box was heavier than it should have been. Her phone buzzed. Her friend Marguerite. "You okay? Heard what happened. Calling you in 5. Saoirse put the phone face down on her knee and looked up at the Meridian building. 22 floors of reflective glass. She had spent 3 years in that building. She had believed in what they were doing. Or she had believed in Declan's belief, which had felt like the same thing at the time. It wasn't the same thing. She understood that now. She had been hired as a junior analyst out of Queens. She had worked harder than anyone in her department, and she had the receipts to prove it. The late nights, the weekends, the presentations she had rebuilt from scratch at 11 p.m. Because Declan had decided the narrative wasn't tight enough, she had done all of it without complaint, partly because she believed in the work, and partly because she was in love with the man who kept telling her she was almost ready for the next level. Almost. Always almost. When Marguerite called, Saoirse let it ring twice before picking up. "Talk," Marguerite said. "I got fired, I know." "Blythe texted me. She said he announced it in the all-hands." Saoirse closed her eyes. "He announced it. He said the firm was restructuring and that your position was being eliminated due to performance concerns. In front of the whole team." "Saoirse, I'm fine." A pause. "You're not. I'm going to be." She looked at the cactus sitting on top of the box. It had 3 small orange flowers on it that had opened that morning. She had noticed them at her desk before the all-hands meeting and thought they were a good sign. "I just need a few minutes." She did not get a few minutes. Her phone buzzed again almost immediately, this time a number she didn't recognize, a 416 area code, local. She almost didn't answer, but something made her. "Is this Saoirse Keane?" A woman's voice. Measured. The kind of voice that didn't waste words. "It is," Saoirse said. "My name is Philippa Drummond. I'm the executive director of Drummond Capital. I believe we've been introduced briefly. I spoke at the King Street Summit in November, and you asked a question during the Q&A about green infrastructure bonds. I remember the question. It was the best one of the day." Saoirse sat very still. "I remember the talk. Good. I won't waste your time. I've been aware of your work at Meridian for about 18 months, specifically the Lakeside Corridor analysis, the one that went out under Declan Ford's name last March." Saoirse said nothing. "That analysis," Philippa continued, "was not Declan Ford's work. I've been in this industry for 26 years, and I know what his thinking looks like. That document was thinking of a different quality entirely. I'd been meaning to approach you. Today seems like an appropriate time." The traffic on Bay Street continued. A streetcar went by, the tracks humming under it. Saoirse watched a pigeon land on the sidewalk 3 feet from her box and consider the cactus. "What kind of approach?" she said. "A conversation. Not today, you've had enough today. But I'd like you to come to our offices on Thursday. I have a role I've been trying to fill for 4 months. I've interviewed 11 people. None of them have had what I'm looking for. A pause that felt deliberate. I suspect you do. After the call ended, Saoirse sat on the bench for a long time. The pigeon lost interest in the cactus and left. The afternoon light shifted. She picked up her phone and called Marguerite back. You're not going to believe this, she said. Thursday came fast. Drummond Capital occupied a restored heritage building on Wellington Street. Sandstone facade, big windows, none of the aggressive glass and steel of the financial district's newer towers. Inside, it felt like a place where people actually thought. Books on shelves that looked used. Whiteboards covered in diagrams that hadn't been erased. A receptionist named Jerome who offered Saoirse tea and meant it. Philippa Drummond was 61 years old, silver-haired, and wore the expression of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by things designed to impress. She shook Saoirse's hand and led her into a corner office with a view of the lake and got straight to it. Tell me about the lakeside analysis, Philippa said. The real version, not the summary that went out. So Saoirse told her. All of it. The methodology she'd built, the local economic indicators she'd weighted differently than standard models. The projection curve that Declan had called too conservative and watered down before he put his name on it. She talked for 20 minutes without stopping. Philippa listened without interrupting. When Saoirse finished, there was a short silence. The projection he cut, Philippa said. The one about the Eastern Corridor undervaluation. What was your confidence interval? 83% over a 7-year horizon. What is it now? Saoirse thought. Better. There's been data out of Hamilton in the last quarter that supports the methodology. I'd say 88, maybe 90. Philippa nodded slowly. The Eastern Corridor is the central asset in a $900 million portfolio I'm currently restructuring. She folded her hands on the desk. And you've been sitting at Meridian, running junior analytics for a man who has been taking credit for your thinking for 3 years. Saoirse didn't answer. That's not a criticism of you, Philippa said. That's an observation about a pattern I've seen before. Young women with exceptional analytical minds who attach themselves to confident men with loud voices and wait for permission to exist at the level they're already operating at. She looked at Saoirse steadily. The permission never comes from that direction. I want you to know that. Something shifted in the room, or maybe in Saoirse. What's the role? Saoirse asked. Head of Portfolio Strategy. You'd be managing 3 analysts, sitting on the investment committee and leading the Eastern Corridor restructuring. You'd be reporting directly to me. Philippa named a number. It was substantially more than what Meridian had been paying her. Saoirse kept her face calm. It took effort. I'd want to think about it, she said. Of course. Philippa stood, which meant the meeting was over. Take the weekend. I've waited 4 months. I can wait until Monday. Saoirse walked out onto Wellington Street into the pale February sun. Her mind was already doing what her mind always did when something large was happening, trying to find the catch, the fine print, the thing she was missing. She didn't find it. She called Marguerite from the sidewalk. She offered me head of portfolio strategy, Saoirse said. A long silence. Then, what did you say? I said I'd think about it. Saoirse Keane, I swear to. I'm going to say yes. I just needed to say I'd think about it. Another silence. Then Marguerite laughed, the big real laugh she'd had since they were 19 and sharing a dorm room at Queen's. How much? Saoirse told her. Marguerite made a sound that wasn't a word. Yeah, Saoirse said. I know. She said yes on Monday morning. By Wednesday, her paperwork was signed. By the following Monday, she had a desk at Drummond Capital, with a view of a courtyard where someone had planted winter kale in raised beds, which she found unreasonably charming. The first week was a steep climb. The Eastern Corridor portfolio was more complex than she'd anticipated. Layered instruments, some legacy positions that made no obvious sense until she understood the relationships behind them. 3 analysts who had been working without strategic direction for 4 months and had developed their own informal hierarchies in the vacuum. She learned their names fast. Tomas, who was meticulous and slow and usually right. Prentice, who was fast and sometimes wrong and always willing to say so. Emeka, who was quiet in meetings and devastating in writing, and had clearly been doing more than his job title suggested. She took them all to lunch at a Portuguese place on King Street at the end of her first week, and asked each of them one question. What's the thing you've been wanting to do with this portfolio that nobody's let you do yet? The answers took 45 minutes, and she wrote all of it down. Tomas wanted to re-examine the hedging strategy on 2 legacy positions that had been assumed stable. Prentice wanted to model a scenario where they moved the Eastern Corridor entry point earlier than currently planned. Emeka pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and handed it across the table. It was a 2-page memo he had written 3 months ago and never sent. Saoirse read it while they waited for dessert. By the time the pastis de nata arrived, she had decided it was one of the smartest things she had read all year. "Why didn't you send it?" she asked. Emeka looked at the table. There was no one to send it to who would have read it properly. Saoirse looked at him. "There is now." She had been at Drummond for 6 weeks when Declan called. She was at her desk on a Tuesday evening. Everyone else already gone, the building quiet the way she liked it. Just the hum of the ventilation system and the glow of her screens, and the winter dark outside the window. His name appeared on her phone, and she felt something move through her that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. Closer to the recognition of a shape she already knew, she let it ring 4 times, then picked up. Saoirse. His voice had that particular quality, warm, controlled, the voice he used when he wanted something. Declan. A pause, as though he'd expected her to say more. "I heard you landed somewheres," he said. "Drummond Capital. Good firm." "It is. Philippa Drummond is. She's formidable. Bit old school, but formidable." Saoirse said nothing. "Listen," he said. "I've been thinking. The way things ended, that was handled badly. I want you to know I didn't intend for it to go the way it did. The restructuring was a board decision. There was a lot of pressure on my end, and you got caught in the middle of something that wasn't about you." She let the silence sit for a moment. "Which part wasn't about me?" she said. "The part where you announced it in the all hands? Or the part where you've been putting your name on my analysis for 3 years? A longer pause this time. "That's not a fair characterization," he said. "We worked on those pieces together. That's how collaboration, Declan." Her voice was even. "I'm going to stop you there. I don't need an explanation. I don't need an apology. I have a good job and I like the people I work with and I'm genuinely fine." She looked out at the courtyard, dark now, the raised beds invisible under a thin layer of snow. "I hope you're well. I really do. But I don't have anything else to say." She ended the call. She sat for a moment looking at the phone in her hand. Then she opened Emeka's memo again and went back to work. The Eastern Corridor analysis came together over 8 weeks. It was the most focused work of Saoirse's life. Early mornings, late nights, entire Saturdays in the office with bad coffee, and the particular satisfaction of a problem that wanted to be solved. Tomas found what he'd suspected in the hedging strategy. 2 legacy positions carrying unacknowledged risk that had been papered over by optimistic assumptions. They moved quickly, and it saved the portfolio a number that made the investment committee's CFO put his pen down mid-meeting and stare at the table. Prentice ran the early entry scenario, and it was, as Saoirse had hoped, more interesting than the original model. She brought it to Philippa directly, in the measured way she had learned Philippa preferred. No preamble, no performance, just the numbers and the reasoning. Philippa listened and then asked a series of questions, each one more specific than the last, testing the model from every angle. Then she said, "Do it." The shift in the entry timing, combined with the work Emeka had outlined in his memo 9 months before anyone was listening to him, restructured the Eastern Corridor positioning entirely. It was a large move. It was not a safe move. It was the right move. Saoirse was sitting at her desk 6 weeks later when the early returns came in from the first position close. Tomas turned from his screen. "Saoirse." She looked up. He said a number. She blinked. "Say that again." He said it again. Prentice had both hands on top of his head. Emeka, characteristically, said nothing, but he was smiling at his keyboard in a way that looked like it was taking some effort to contain. The number was not just good. The number was the kind of result that gets written up, the kind that changes the way people in a certain world look at a firm, and at the person who built the strategy. Saoirse sat very still for a moment. Then she got up and went to Philippa's office and knocked on the open door. Philippa was reading. She looked up. "The first close came in," Saoirse said. She said the number. Philippa set down her papers. She did not smile exactly. It was more the expression of someone whose thesis has been confirmed and who knew it would be but is still, in some private way, pleased. Good, she said. Sit down. We need to talk about what comes next. What came next was larger than Saoirse had anticipated. In late April, Drummond Capital was named in the Globe and Mail's annual feature on Canada's most significant portfolio moves of the quarter. The Eastern Corridor restructuring was described in 2 paragraphs. Saoirse Keane was named. The methodology was described as a quietly unconventional approach to regional infrastructure valuation that outperformed sector benchmarks by a margin that has analysts reassessing their models. She read it on her phone on the streetcar on the way to the office. She read it twice. She called her sister Orla, who screamed loud enough that the man sitting across from her on the car looked up from his newspaper. Send it to me, Orla said. I'm sending it. Mom's going to lose her mind. Please warn her first. Orla laughed. Are you crying? No, she was, a little, not because of the article. Because of the 3 years before the article. Because of the cardboard box and the cactus and the bench on Bay Street in February, and the way the cold had felt like an answer to a question she hadn't asked. I'm fine. I'm on the streetcar. Go be brilliant, Orla said. I'll deal with Mom. When she got to the office, Jerome at the front desk handed her usual tea and then said, with his characteristic understatement, Congratulations, by the way. We're all very pleased. She thanked him and took the stairs. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it. Tomas, Prentice, and Emeka were already in. They had all developed the habit of early mornings over the last few months, not because she'd asked them to, but because the work had that quality that makes people want to show up. Emeka had printed the Globe article and put it on her keyboard. On top of it was a sticky note in his handwriting. You sent the memo. She picked it up and looked at it for a moment. Then she went to her computer, opened her calendar, and blocked off Friday afternoon. She took her team to the Portuguese place on King Street. This time she ordered the good wine. Tomas made a toast that was technical and precise, and slightly too long and completely sincere. Prentice made one that was short and irreverent and made everyone laugh. Emeka didn't make a toast. He just raised his glass and looked at Saoirse, and nodded once, and she understood everything he meant. On a Thursday evening in early May, Saoirse was finishing a call when her assistant forwarded a message that had come through the firm's general inquiry line. It was from Meridian Financial, not from Declan, from the firm's new managing partner, a man named Holt who had taken the role when Declan stepped down in March. The message was professional and brief. Meridian was looking at a significant infrastructure position in the Eastern Corridor and had become aware of her work on the subject. They wanted to know if Drummond Capital would be open to a conversation about a potential advisory relationship. Saoirse read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Philippa with a single line. Your call. I'm comfortable either way. Philippa's response came 4 minutes later. We'll take the meeting, but you lead it. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday morning 3 weeks out, in a neutral location, a boardroom at a hotel on Front Street. Saoirse arrived first. She set up her laptop and her notes and her water glass, and she sat down and she waited. The Meridian team came in. Holt, 2 senior analysts, an associate she didn't recognize, and Declan. He was not leading the group. Holt was, but he was there in the back row, which meant this was still a significant enough meeting that they'd brought him. He looked at Saoirse when he came in, and his expression did something complicated that she didn't spend time analyzing. Holt introduced himself and got down to it. He was direct and professional, and clearly had done his homework. Saoirse presented Drummond Capital's Eastern Corridor position and the strategic framework she'd built. She spoke for 20 minutes without notes. When she was done, Holt asked 4 questions. She answered all 4. He nodded after each one with the focused expression of someone who is recalibrating. When it was over, Holt shook her hand across the table and said, I understand we got this backwards. We should have been working with you a long time ago. You're working with us now, she said. That's what matters. Declan didn't say anything during the meeting. On the way out, passing her chair, he stopped. She looked up. You were always the best analyst in that building, he said. It was a true thing and she knew he meant it, and she also knew he had known it for years, and had chosen systematically and repeatedly to keep it to himself. She nodded. Thank you, she said, and meant it, in the way you can mean something without it being generous. without it letting anyone off the hook. He left. She gathered her papers and her laptop. She took the elevator down to Front Street and stood in the May sun outside the hotel. The city was warm for the first time since fall. The lake, 3 blocks south, was the particular shade of blue it gets in early spring before the summer haze arrives. A streetcar went by on the tracks that ran down the middle of the street, the sound of it familiar in the way of things that have always been there. She put her face up toward the sun for a moment. Her phone buzzed. "Philippa, how did it go?" Saoirse typed back, "We have a deal, I'll debrief you at 2. She put the phone in her pocket and started walking north, toward Wellington Street, toward the sandstone building and the courtyard, with the raised beds that would have kale in them by summer, toward Tomas and Prentice and Emeka, and the work that was waiting, always waiting, with the particular patience of a problem that knows it will eventually be solved. The most important thing she had learned in the last 4 months was not about the portfolio. It was not about the methodology, or the benchmarks, or the Eastern Corridor, or any of the numbers that were now attached to her name in print. It was something Philippa had said to her in their second week, offhandedly, on the way down the stairs. Rooms change when you walk into them, whether you're aware of it or not. The only question is whether you're going to be deliberate about it. Saoirse had been thinking about it ever since. She walked up Bay Street in the May sun with her bag over her shoulder, and she was 29 years old, and she was not waiting for permission from anyone, not anymore, and the city opened up ahead of her in the long, unhurried way of a place that has seen enough to know that the story is never over when you think it is.